What if Edward regrets cheating on Bella? Isabella Marie Swan. 4 years ago, I met Edward Cullen, and it had been the start of a seemingly fairy tale romance. We worked together at Masson Law Firm in Washington, D.C. He was a lawyer, I was a secretary at the front desk, and everything had been amazing. All the fellow secretaries had been jealous of all the times Edward came by my desk after work to either take me home or take me out somewhere, and I had been thrilled at the attention I was getting from a young, extremely handsome, successful lawyer. Edward was wonderful. For 2 years after we started dating, it had been perfect, and Edward had always been the perfect boyfriend. He took me out to nice restaurants and bought me things that I didn't need. I became close with his parents, Carlisle and Esme, and his sister Alice, and I became best friends nearly right away. It wasn't hard for me to fall in love with Edward, because he was everything that I had ever wanted. 2 years ago, Edward Cullen proposed to me. There had been a little blue box with a pretty white bow and a beautiful diamond ring inside. Of course I had said yes. I loved him. Esme Cullen had thrown us a big party, and we had started planning the wedding right away. Alice and Esme had gone crazy over the preparations, even though we couldn't set the date. For some reason, nothing seemed right. And then I knew why no date had ever seemed good enough. 1 year ago, Edward Cullen left me. Admittedly, I had seen it coming. Amidst all the craziness of our life together, I saw that he wasn't happy. In all reality, he hadn't been the one to leave me, we had left each other. I had come home from dinner with Alice, and when I walked into the townhouse, he had been sitting at the dining room table in the dark, surrounded by plans for our wedding. I had stepped into the room, and when his eyes met mine, I could see the difference. His 4 words had pierced my heart: "We need to talk." And so had talked for hours. Our conversation ended with me taking off my beautiful engagement ring and placing it in the outstretched palm of my equally beautiful ex-fiancée. And that had been it. That night I had slept in the spare bedroom, and by the end of the week I had moved out of Edward's townhouse and arranged to stay with my friend Angela until I could find a place of my own. Everyone had been stunned, to say the least. Alice had refused to talk to me for over a week. Esme had been in tears, and my parents had tried to convince me to move back home to Seattle. It had been difficult, seeing Edward every day at work right after the end of our engagement. People around the office had started rumors, saying that Edward had been cheating on me, saying that his family had secretly hated me, and saying that our relationship had been doomed from the very start. It had gotten a little easier though, and eventually it has become less and less awkward for us to be around each other and hold casual conversations. And because of Alice, we have been around each other more than normal exes would be. 2 weeks ago, Edward Cullen got engaged to Rosalie Hale after a 6-month-long relationship. Alice, with no regard to my feelings whatsoever, has told me all about Rosalie. She was, of course, beautiful. Blonde hair and blue eyes, she wasn't exactly your typical prosecutor. I had seen her around the office before, and she had just started at the firm 8 months ago. We had never been formally introduced, but from what I could tell she was a nice girl. But that didn't exactly ease any of my pain, seeing as Edward had proposed to her and he was officially no longer my ex-fiancé, because he was her fiancé now. Tonight was their engagement party, and thanks to Alice, I was going. She told me that it would help me move on, seeing the man I had been planning on marrying happy with another woman. So I put on a nice dress and a pair of heels, did my hair, and got into my car before driving to Carlisle and Esme's house in Mount Vernon, Virginia. Once I got there, I sat in my car for a moment and stared up at the big white house, and I started blinking back tears. My own engagement party had been held here in this house. Edward and I had stood in the parlor, wearing fancy clothes and greeting guests and showing off my engagement ring. But I was no longer the lucky girl at Edward's side. Sucking in a deep breath, I checked my hair and makeup in my rearview mirror and then gathered up my purse and got out of the car. There were already people at the house, thankfully. There would be absolutely no focus on me at all. Esme opened the door when I rang, and immediately pulled me into her arms. "Oh, Bella, bless you for coming. I know this all must be hard for you," Esme exclaimed, and I stiffened up slightly, my smile faltering. "I'm fine," I assured her, and Esme just smiled tightly and ushered me further into the house. "Edward and Rosalie are over there," but, before Esme could finish her sentence, the doorbell rang out and she shot me an apologetic look before hurrying to answer the door again. I reluctantly made my way over to the happy couple, holding back slightly. Edward spotted me as I approached, and when our eyes met, I immediately saw obvious happiness in his emerald green eyes. "Congratulations," I said as I came up to them. Edward nodded, giving me a quick hug and peck on the cheek. "Hello, Bella, it's nice to see you," he said, and he sounded genuine and honest. "Rose, this is Bella Swan. Bella, this is Rosalie Hale, my fiancée." Edward introduced us formally and I shook hands with Rosalie. Rosalie smiled at me, and I cringed slightly when I saw the ring that had once been mine perched on her ring finger. The ring had been Edward's grandmother's, so of course he had kept it. But it was still strange to see the ring that had been on my finger at one time now sit upon Rosalie's ring finger. "How do you two know each other?" Rosalie asked, and both Edward and I froze slightly. She must have known Edward had been engaged before, right? Edward recovered quickly, clearing his throat. "Bella and I were engaged until last year," he said quietly, and a look of understanding came over Rosalie's face. "Yes, well, it was very nice to meet you," I said, looking over my shoulder. "Congratulations again," I said nicely, and then hurried off. While that had been difficult for me, it had not been unbearable. I had spoken to Edward plenty of times since we had broken up. So what if he was getting married? At least Edward was happy. He was a wonderful person, wishing him happiness was easy for me. As I walked around the room, I was assaulted by familiar images. I couldn't believe that 2 years ago, this had been mine. Why hadn't I been enough? I had asked myself that very question thousands of times now, and I still didn't have the answer that I was looking for. The night had broken things off. Edward and I had talked a lot about our ideas of the future, and I remember being stunned that our dreams and aspirations hadn't matched up in the slightest. I wanted a life in the suburbs with kids and minivans, and Edward wanted a life of work and travel. For months we had simply been pretending to be happy together, when we really weren't. A lot of elements of our relationship had been fine, but the important parts had somehow been mangled beyond recognition or repair. I was only 28 years old, and I knew that there was someone out there right for me. But my brain and my heart were confused. My heart was telling me that I had already found the love of my life and let him go, while my brain was telling me that Edward had never really been mine. "Bella," Alice approached me, flinging her arms around me and squeezing tightly. "I wasn't sure if you were going to show. Have you talked to Edward and Rosalie? Aren't they the cutest?" For the third time, I stiffened up. This time, it wasn't in discomfort, it was in anger. "Stop it," I said through my teeth, crossing my arms over my chest. "You know I only came here because you told me it would make things easier. But you know what? It's not getting any better for me. You're supposed to be my best friend, Alice. Why in the world would you think that this would make things easier? This," I gestured in the direction of Edward and Rosalie, "is making my heart hurt so badly that I can barely breathe. And you know what? I'm done. Done with you. Done with Edward, and done with your whole goddamn family." With that I wrenched myself away from her, my supposed best friend, and stomped away. I wasn't even thinking as I stormed down the back hallway, but I froze when I flung open the first door that I came across. It was Edward's old room. Wiping my eyes, I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. I had been in this room twice before, when Edward and I had stayed here with his parents, but I had never really paid close attention to anything. Now, I walked towards the far wall and looked closely at a bulletin board covered in pictures. Some of them were from Edward and Alice's childhood, but a lot of them were from his high school and college years. There was also one of Edward and Rosalie, tacked in the corner. With a shaking hand, I reached over and picked it up, wanting to get a better look. But when I did, another picture came into view. It was one of Edward and I, back before we had gotten engaged. It was our first Christmas together. It had snowed well over 6 inches the night before, and I remember going outside to look at the beautiful wonderful. The picture, which had been taken by Esme, was sweet and playful. I was standing in the snow, and Edward was hugging me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Both of us had huge smiles plastered across our faces. I looked back and forth between the two pictures, tears streaming down my face. What was so different between Rosalie and I? Why hadn't I been enough? And to Edward you left me. Why can't you leave her? Isabella Marie Swan. Eventually, I managed to compose myself and I left Edward's old room, straightening my dress and hair as I did so. As I walked back into the great room, Alice reappeared at my side instantly. "Bella, I'm so sorry," she said softly, grabbing my elbow to keep me from getting away from her. "Really, I am. I was just really excited about my brother getting married, and I wasn't thinking of you as Edward's ex-fiancé, but just as my friend." Alice apologized profusely, but I remained silent. "Come on, Bella, please. I do know that it's difficult for you, okay? I just don't know how to make things less awkward. Usually in your situation, I could just hate your ex and we could get on with things. But in this case, the guy that broke your heart, he was my brother. I just don't know how to balance the two of you." I remained silent for a moment more, and then pulled Alice into a hug. "I know. You were wrong, but I'm sorry too, for putting you in the middle," I said, and Alice hugged me back tightly. "Also, sorry I overacted a bit there. I'm just a little frazzled," I confessed. "So are we good?" Alice asked, and I nodded. "Great," Alice said, releasing me and smiling widely. "I'll stick to your side all night, I promise. You can avoid any potential awkwardness." And then she lowered her voice, squeezing my hand. "You're brave, Bella. Thank you for coming." I nodded again, and then we dropped the subject for good. As promised, Alice stayed by my side for the rest of the night, and I managed to avoid both Edward and Rosalie. But I still saw them. I saw them talking quietly, saw them kissing, saw them just gazing into each other's eyes, saw them looking so in love. And I saw Rosalie looking at Edward the way that I used to look at him. "Rosalie Lillian Hale, I don't think your ex liked me very much," I called from the bathroom as I towel-dried my hair. I poked my head out of the doorframe and raised my eyebrows at Edward, daring him to prove me wrong. Edward chuckled, pulling back the covers on our bed. "I'd imagine not," he said dryly, and then pulled his shirt over his head and tossed it in the hamper. "What time do you have to be into work tomorrow?" he questioned, toying with the alarm clock. I went back into the bathroom, hanging up my towel. 8, I called, picking up my toothbrush and toothpaste. "Are we going in together?" "Yeah, sure," Edward replied, and I finished up brushing my teeth before joining him in the bedroom. "That party lasted way too long. It's past midnight, for God's sake." Edward sighed, rubbing his forehead and leaning against the headboard of our bed. "I love my mother to death, but sometimes she gets a little too dedicated to her wedding planning." Edward sighed, and I nodded my head absent-mindedly as I pulled on a ribbed tank top and a pair of yellow panties. "It was our engagement party, Edward. I think your mom was just excited," I said, flicking off the lamp and crawling into bed next to him. "But I do have a question. Why in the world was your ex-fiancé invited to your engagement party?" I asked curiously. Edward sighed loudly, kissing my temple. "When Bella and I ended things, we agreed to remain friends. If not that, then at least friendly." "Okay, why? Why didn't you just forget each other and move on with your lives?" I questioned, and Edward sat up in bed, flicking on the lamp again. "Rosalie, I at least owe Bella friendship, after all the pain that she's been through. You should have heard the rumors that went around at the office after our breakup. They were terrible, and they were all against Bella. God, Rosalie, what I've put her through in the past year," Edward trailed off, sighing heavily. "You have to understand that Bella is a good person. She didn't deserve what she got. We broke off our engagement mutually. It wasn't really her fault, it wasn't really my fault. It just didn't work out, and neither of us were happy towards the end, not in the slightest." I was quiet, processing what Edward had just told me. It scared me that Edward had broken an engagement before, especially because he had been with Bella for so much longer than he had been with me. Our relationship had moved very quickly, but I didn't feel like things were moving too fast. I couldn't wait to be married to Edward. We had such similar ideas of the future, too. Both of us were very career-oriented, neither of us wanted any children, and we both had the same career path. We knew what we wanted, and we wanted it together. "Okay," I finally said, and Edward exhaled loudly. "I'm tired. Good night. I love you." "Love you too," Edward sighed softly, kissing me softly on the lips before turning off the lamp for the last time and rolling over onto his side. Although I was tired, I couldn't fall asleep right away. I stayed awake long after Edward drifted off, wondering how Bella Swan had been able to cope with losing someone like Edward. Esme Ann Platt Cullen. It had been another late, busy night. I walked through the house sleepily, extinguishing candles left over from the party. It had been wonderful, and I loved seeing my usually brooding son happy, but there had also been a downside to the party. When Edward had brought Bella Swan to meet the family 4 years ago, I was immediately taken with the girl. She was almost 5 years younger than Edward, but she acted just as mature as he did, sometimes more so. Bella had put a spark in Edward's eye, a spring in his step, a smile on his face. I had been thrilled to see my son finally settling down with such a wonderful woman. I still have no idea why they really ended their engagement. Both of them insisted that it was mutual, and that they hadn't been happy. But how could that spark between them just die out? I couldn't figure that out. And then, 6 months after their breakup, I found out from Alice that Edward was dating someone new. I was a little surprised that he was moving on so fast, but figured he could use a little happiness. Carlisle and I had met Rosalie Hale soon after, and she was very different from Bella. She is, of course, a very nice girl. I knew that she was smart and successful, but I couldn't help but wish Edward was still with Bella. Eventually, I grew to like Rosalie very much, but it was still a little strange. But 2 weeks ago, I got a call from my son telling me that he and Rosalie had gotten engaged, and I had been stunned. It had barely been a year since he and Bella had ended things. How could Edward move on so quickly? I didn't know, but he definitely had. I still liked Rosalie, because she was a nice girl, but I was still extremely surprised. I was even more surprised when Bella showed up to their engagement party. Alice had convinced me to invite her, and I had despite my better judgment. Alice was close to Bella still, so I trusted her when she said inviting Bella would help her move on. I hadn't expected her to come, but she had, looking just as beautiful as I remembered her. I would never admit this to anyone, not even my own husband, but I secretly wished that Edward and Bella had never broken up and that they had gotten married and ended up with a happily ever after. The pained, awkward look in Bella's eyes told me otherwise, and it soon became obvious to me that she was still very much in love with my son. I have made a lot of wrong decisions in my life, without any doubt. But the biggest of these was when I let Bella Swan go. The night that we broke things off had easily been one of the worst nights of my life. Even though I had been the one to say, "We need to talk," I had been hoping that things could have been reconciled. However, as our conversation went on, it was painfully apparent that neither of us were very happy at all. How had we not seen this coming? For 3 years, Bella and I had been blissfully in love. But that was before we took our future into account. Bella had been furious when I remained adamant on my feelings about having children. She wanted to be a mother, but I could never picture myself as a father, and that was kind of a deal breaker for Bella. And just because I had moved on quickly didn't mean I had just fallen out of love with Bella. It meant that a rebound with Rosalie had just turned into more. Because in all honesty, that's what Rosalie was supposed to be, a rebound. That sounds terrible even to me, but it was the truth. After Bella and I ended our relationship, it was easier to be with someone else than it was to be alone. I did love Rosalie, but sometimes I felt like I had to try too hard to make our relationship work, especially after we had gotten engaged. With Bella, everything had been effortless until the very end. And in all the things going on in my life right now, there is one thing that I really did not understand. How could I love a woman like Rosalie when I loved a woman like Bella, too? They were so completely different, in appearance, behavior, emotions, and personality. Bella was short with brown hair and brown eyes, and she was quiet but confident and intelligent. While she often kept to herself, she was very compassionate and loving and sweet. Her beauty was understated and sophisticated, and that was the way that she dressed as well. Rosalie, however, was almost the exact opposite. She was tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she was also intelligent, but she didn't think things out and she often made rash decisions. Rosalie was extremely outgoing, and had a less kind-hearted demeanor. Her beauty was strong and apparent, and she made bolder choices. I would be the first to admit that I still did have some feelings for Bella. I felt guilty for that, because Rosalie truly was a wonderful woman, and I loved her. When we had gotten engaged, I had been very serious about it. Our relationship was still new, but Rosalie was amazing, the woman of my dreams. I had to ignore the lingering feelings I felt for Bella. Ending things between us had not been one-sided, it had been a mutual agreement. We felt the same way, and agreed that breaking up was the best choice. Now, even though I had Rosalie, I wish that we had at least tried to fix things. But obviously, it's too late now. There are 4 things in life that you can never take back: a stone after it is thrown, a word after it is said, time after it has passed, and in this case, an engagement that has been broken. Mary Alice Cullen. My older brother is an idiot for losing Bella Swan. When he brought Bella to meet me, over 4 years ago, I had been ecstatic. Edward's previous girlfriends had been boring and dull, and Bella actually had a personality. She and my brother had been the world's cutest couple, and everybody had seen it. Everyone in the family adored Bella, from my parents and grandparents to my aunts, uncles, and cousins. We had become friends very quickly, and we balanced each other out very nicely. I knew that sometimes I was rude and blunt, but Bella usually mellowed me out. And a lot of times Bella was shy and quiet, but after time with me and Edward, she came out of her shell. Despite Edward and Bella's age difference, they had a very similar personality. Both of them were serious and mature, but also had a wonderful playful side that came out every once in a while. I also loved seeing my brother happy, and Edward had always been happy around Bella. Their breakup had devastated me. I had been so excited that my best friend would be marrying my brother and would truly be my sister, but I was even more upset that they let each other go without even trying to work things out. After several months of unhappiness, the 2 of them had simply given up on each other. I knew that they were over, but I had still been surprised when, 6 months later, I had gone to eat lunch with Edward in his office and had found him kissing a buxom blonde woman. I liked Rosalie, I truly did. She was perfectly nice and seemed to make Edward happy, just like Bella had. I also noticed that Rosalie was nearly the exact opposite of Bella. Rosalie and I had become friends as well, but I found that I missed hanging out with Edward and Bella together. We had always had so much fun, and now that was all over. It wasn't the same with Rosalie, no matter how hard I tried. I felt bad, putting Edward and Bella in the middle. I would be thrilled if they would just get back together already, but I knew that there was a very slim chance, seeing as they had both hurt each other. Somehow, Edward has managed to move on much faster than Bella, who I know is still broken up about that whole thing. Bella and Edward broke up because they weren't happy. But doesn't being happy mean that you've decided to see beyond the imperfections of life? Carlisle Cullen. Do you like Rosalie? My wife's question startled me, and I looked up from the newspaper with furrowed eyebrows. Excuse me, I asked, clearing my throat. Esme rolled her eyes, because I had obviously heard her question. It was the morning after our son and Rosalie's engagement party, and I knew that Esme had something on her mind. Sure, I said, shrugging my shoulders and looking back down at my newspaper. She's a nice girl, Esme hummed slightly under her breath, and I looked up at her again. What? I asked, and Esme exhaled loudly, chewing on her thumbnail as she looked down at the tabletop instead of at me. Do you like Rosalie as much as you liked Bella? She asked, and I nearly spit out the mouthful of coffee I had just sipped. Had my wife really just asked me to compare our son's current fiancé to his ex-fiancé? Sadly, I did have answer to her question. Of course I had liked Bella more, she just seemed to be the missing puzzle piece in Edward's life. I don't know what went wrong, but it shocked us all when Edward and Bella broke up last year. Clearing my throat again, I answered Esme's question. Well, they are very different, and they both have good and bad qualities. Esme raised her eyebrows at me, and I sighed, holding my hands up in defeat. Fine. No, I don't like Rosalie as much as I liked Bella. I thought Bella was a better match for Edward. I relinquished, and Esme nodded her head. Exactly what I think, she murmured, taking a sip of her coffee and gazing out the window behind me. But it's not our place to say, is it? She sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't want him to make any more mistakes. Esme whispered, looking me straight in the eye. It would hurt him too much, to go through that again. I was quiet for a moment, and then spoke. I don't want him to relive the past. I revealed, and Esme shook her head, looking down at her coffee cup again. Honey, that's why our eyes are on the front, she said playfully, smiling now. Because it is more important to look ahead than it is to look back. Rosalie Lillian Hale, where do you need to move for dinner? I mused, looking down at my iPhone. Edward shrugged his shoulders, not taking his eyes off of the road as we drove. Edward, I stated, and he slightly seemed over at me. What do you need for dinner? I asked again, and once more he just shrugged his shoulders. It were like this the complete goddamn car ride. He pissed at me for a few reasons. What is your problem this morning? I asked angrily, and Edward pinched the bride of his nose between his thumb and index finger. I hated it when he did that. I am just in a terrible temper. Edward snapped. Well, duh, I muttered beneath my breath, crossing my fingers throughout my chest and staring out the window. The downtown Washington, D.C. traffic moved slowly, and the silence in the car changed into nearly unbearable. Some extra minutes surpassed, and I appeared lower back closer to Edward. Do you need to have lunch collectively? I requested, and Edward shook his head. Esme already got to me. He muttered, glancing at the time and furrowing his brow. We are going to be overdue to paintings. I nodded barely, turning lower back to appearance out the window once more. I failed to realize what in the global changed into happening with Edward. For some time now, he's been remote and bored to death. At first, I had concept that maybe he became simply under pressure, but he has been acting like this ever on account that we were given engaged. Nervously, I twisted the ring on my finger, wondering if Edward regretted his selection to recommend. Even as his idea had critically surprised me, I had been pleased. Edward turned into the type of man that almost each woman wanted to marry. He was candy, remarkable, searching, clever, successful, type, and assured. But now as the preliminary exhilaration wore off, I was doubtful. We were a relationship for barely 6 months. He had known as off an engagement handiest a year ago, and to a girl he had dated for 3 years. Edward and that I loved every different. But wouldn't it be enough for us to make it through difficult instances? What's up, Rosalie? I peeked up from my desk and noticed Jessica, some other attorney at the company, standing the doorway to my office. What's up, Jess? I stated, pushing my papers to the aspect. What's up? Jessica smiled at me and walked into my workplace, ultimate the door in the back of her. I knew the appearance in her eyes, too. She had a few gossip to percentage. Bella Swan, Edward's ex-fiancée, she asked, and I nodded, sticking out my tongue. Jessica giggled, clapping her palms collectively. No matter being in her mid-1930s, Jessica regularly acted like a 7-12 months old when it came to gossip. Nicely, I was simply in reception, and Esme Cullen changed into down there, too. Jessica paused, leaning in closer to me. Are you conscious that your fiancé is having lunch with his mom and ex-fiancé? Jessica requested, and I gasped audibly. What? I snapped, and Jessica shrugged her shoulders. I walked past and I heard Bella say that she didn't want to hassle Edward, however Esme insisted, so they're all having lunch collectively nowadays. I pursed my lips, thinking about my destiny mother-in-law. Esme Cullen turned into first class to me. That was all. Although she had thrown Edward and that our engagement celebration, she by no means surely acted inquisitive about me or my dating with Edward. I had long passed out with Alice and Esme before, and at the same time as Alice had chattered without end, Esme had continually been a little quiet and standoffish. And now I knew why. She obviously desired Bella to me. My anger flared up fast, and that I almost drop-kicked Jessica out of my workplace. Became Esme making plans on speaking to Edward and Bella, trying to get them to see the mistake in their methods. Did she want them to get returned together? Anger coursed through my veins, and I picked up my phone, dialing the quantity to Edward's office. It went straight to voicemail, and did the equal once I tried his cellular phone. I slammed the smartphone backpedal, cursing to myself. I swear to God, if Esme tries taking Edward and Bella on a ride down Reminiscence Lane, I do not even realize how I'm going to include myself. Reminiscence is a manner of retaining directly to the things you adore, the stuff you are, and the belongings you by no means want to lose. Kevin Arnold. Isabella Marie Swan. Esme Cullen was chronic, she always had been. But why had I permit her talk me into this? He become my ex-fiancé, for the affection of God. Why had I agreed to devour lunch with him and his mom? I knew the answer to that, Though, despite the fact that I hadn't ended up marrying her son, Esme becomes still like a mom to me, and I might constantly want to thrill her. I need to simply recover from that. Rosalie is going to be her daughter in regulation now, not me. However, I did what she requested anyway. I couldn't say no to her. So I used to be almost condemning myself to hell as I observed her down the hallway towards Edward's workplace. He in all likelihood failed to understand that I would be becoming a member of them for lunch. Would he be mad? Would he even care? When we have been dating, we used to every lunch collectively each single day. It have been our non-public assignment to attempt to eat at each eating place in a 5-block radius, and after 3 years collectively, we had succeeded. And that becomes something that we had each been extraordinarily happy with. Esme knocked lightly before pushing the door to Edward's office open, and that I bit my lip nervously. Whilst Edward noticed his mom, he held up his index finger as he spoke at the smartphone, gesturing for her to wait. He stuck sight of me, and his eyes widened slightly, but he had no different reaction. Esme and that I waited patiently for Edward to get off of his call, and while he sooner or later did, he stood up and gave his mom and I each a hug. Granted, the hug he gave me changed into brief and slightly awkward, but at this he became looking to honor the promise we had made to remain friendly. Bella is going to enroll in us for lunch, Esme stated, touching my shoulder because the three folks exited Edward's office. Edward looked over his shoulder at me, nodding. "Kay. This is pleasant." We walked to a cafe down the block, and Edward and I saved replacing glances as Esme walked numerous steps in the front of us. Every once in a while she could look over her shoulder at us. By the point we got to the cafe, I was weirded out and could inform that Edward changed into two. He saved taking pictures his mother stressed seams. Eventually, as we waited for a desk, Edward pulled out his mobile cell phone and started out texting someone. And as we moved toward our table once we have been eventually referred to as, he tugged on his mom's sleeve. "Rosalie is pissed. And that I refused to take all the blame." He muttered quietly in Esme's ear, and that I flushed scarlet. Notable. Now I had mad Rosalie mad, even if it wasn't my aim to achieve this. Edward pulled out my chair for me and Esme's, after which we all sat down, Edward and that I staring down closely at our place settings. "Bella, how are you doing?" Esme asked me, and my head shot up. I cleared my throat, barely flustered. I am great," I stated softly, tucking a bit of hair in the back of my ear. "I am going to nighttime school now, since I in no way completed college." I noticed Esme's eyebrows rise, so I endured. "I need to be an instructor," I defined. "Preferably for kids in standard college. I assume it's simply the cutest age," I said with a smile, and that I noticed Edward's face tighten slightly, "but I have nonetheless we're given 3.5 years left." I brought softly, searching down at the table once more. "That is high quality." I was amazed whilst Edward spoke up, however he failed to say something else about the problem. "Yes, Bella, it's far," Esme said, taking a sip of her drink, which the waiter had simply introduced. "Why didn't you go to high school faster although?" she asked, and that I snuck a peek at Edward through my eyelashes. I hesitated, biting my bottom lip. Nicely, while Edward and I were given engaged, I cleared my throat, my cheeks vivid crimson. I determined that I wouldn't go to high school. However, now I have the possibility, I murmured, and each Edward and Esme have been silent for an extended moment. "I certainly like it." I tacked that directly to the end, because I did not recognize what else I should genuinely say. In the end the waiter approached and took our orders, and Esme did not talk again till after that. "You are a fantastic young girl, Bella. Any man would be lucky to have you." Edward and I each glanced up at every other in brief, after which hurriedly looked away. "Stay without a limits, love without a regrets." Esme Ann Platt Cullen. I am now not going to lie. I was pleased with myself. My one task this afternoon turned into to just get Edward and Bella to lunch together, and I had succeeded in that, obviously. Rosalie wasn't very satisfied with me, however I've put up with masses of indignant ladies in my career as a marriage planner. She would not scare me within the slightest, and that I suppose that I understand what's great for my son. And in reality, Bella is what's best for Edward. They may have ended matters a year in the past, however that failed to suggest that they nonetheless didn't have a risk. I did sense a touch awful for doing this at the same time as Edward become engaged to Rosalie, but I additionally felt completely justified. Bella and Edward have been awkward over lunch to mention the least, but that changed into to be predicted. They had to be comfortable with each other once more, and that became exactly what I was attempting to accomplish. Lower back after they were dating, they had spent almost each waking second collectively, that they had almost been connected on the hip. Even if I failed to recognize my son and his ex, I ought to see that regardless of their split, they belonged collectively. I saw it, even my oblivious husband noticed it, so why could not the two of them simply figure it out already? They could discern it out soon sufficient, if I had whatever to mention approximately it. Rosalie Lillian Hale, I was beyond mad. I was pissed, I was harmed, I used to be scorned, and I was harassed. What the fuck was she wondering? I spat, pounding my fist on the tabletop. She's your ex-fiancé. Why could your mom try this to me? Does she hate me? I asked angrily, and Edward simply checked out me, no longer saying something. Oh, come on, Edward. I sneered, swatting my hair out of my eyes. Simply inform me. Does your mom have some type of trouble with me that might make her do this? Edward turned into still quiet, and that I sighed angrily. Why was he even staying quiet like this? Generally, he could simply get proper in my face, particularly once I knew what had long passed on this afternoon. Esme Cullen had taken Edward and Bella out to lunch, and I was pissed about it. Just neglect about Bella. Edward eventually spoke, and I threw my hands up in the air in pissed off. Oh fucking hell, Rosalie, just drop it. Edward yelled, and that I jumped slightly at his unexpected change in temper. I do not want to talk approximately Bella Swan, specifically with you. What's that meant to mean? I asked indignantly, and Edward rolled his eyes at me. Come on, simply say it. What are you attempting to mention right here? It method that my ex-fiancé is none of your enterprise. If I want to spend time together with her, I'm able to. You actually cannot forestall me. Edward snapped, and if Esme hates you, it is certainly now not my fault. Edward delivered, and my mouth dropped open in surprise. Perhaps in case you were a bit nicer from time to time, humans wouldn't hate you. That changed into the final straw. I stood up, setting my hands on my hips and rounding on him. Who hates me? Your parents, your sister, your ex-fiancé. Properly, screw them. This is supposed to be our existence, Edward. We are alleged to get married, recollect. I was so irritated that I used to be nearly shaking. But Edward regarded unfazed and nonchalant. You still want to marry me, do not you? I requested in a small, timid voice that did not even sound like mine, and Edward glanced up at me. His inexperienced eyes had been darkish and worn out looking. Yeah, he said in a small voice that did nothing to calm me down. I am going out. Edward saw Ed, standing up from the table as well. He would not make eye touch with me. He turned into staring down at his toes with his palms shoved in the pockets of his jeans. Don't wait up. Edward delivered, taking walks in the direction of the door. I watched helplessly, practically frozen immediately, as he slipped on his jacket and grabbed his keys. After which, without some other word to me, he became out the door. Mary Alice Cullen. I knew it turned into him when I heard our unique knock on my condominium door. We had made it up one rainy day back when I used to be 5 and Edward changed into 8. It become 2 tender knocks, 2 loud knocks, after which 1 jiggle of the doorknob. I also knew that Edward simplest used that knock while he became mad or disappointed. For example, the last time Edward used that knock, he had told me that he and Bella had broken their engagement. So I leapt to my toes without hesitation, leaping over the footstool in my dwelling room and skirting around the coffee table. I were given to the door and fast undid the chain, and then flung it open. What's incorrect? I blurted out, and then I took inside the sight of my older brother. He was mad, that lots turned into manifestly. His arms were shoved inside the wallet of his denims, and his green eyes had been sharp and his expression turned into on part. What's wrong, Edward? I requested again, and he driven beyond me into the condo. Wordlessly, I closed the door once more and turned around. Edward changed into sitting on the sofa, his hand in his hands. I nonetheless love Bella. Mary Alice Cullen. I still love Bella, Edward muttered, and I started at him in shock. Oh, I said softly, finally moving to sit down next to him on the couch. I gingerly reached over and put my arms around his shoulders, not sure of what to say to Edward. I knew that he still loved Bella, that much was obvious, but now that he finally realized it, it was different. They had a chance now, if he was going to leave Rosalie. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Edward shrugged his shoulders, still not looking at me. "Oh, I don't know." He sighed. "Rosalie Bella fuck." He spat, and then looked up at me. His eyes were red and bloodshot, and his hair was even more mussed than usual. "Look, I'm sorry for barging in like this, but to sort things out, I think I need to be away from Rosalie for a little while. Can I sleep on your couch?" Isabella Marie Cullen. "Bella, do you think you could come in here?" I looked up from my desk as I heard my boss, Matthew, call out to me. "Yes." I stood up, a little unsteady in my heels, and walked into Matthew's office. Matthew McCarty was one of the partners at the law firm, and when his personal assistant was gone on vacation like she was this month, I would take her place. I had known Matthew for years, but he was still my boss and he was still very intimidating. Although he was in his late 40s, he had piercing gray eyes, curly brown hair, and good looks that made him look much younger. Matthew glanced up at me when I walked into his office. "Hello, Bella, take a seat," he said, nodding to the chair in front of his desk. I sat down and crossed my ankles, folding my hands on my lap. Matthew, although kind, was also very unpredictable. I could never tell if his news would be good or bad. "Are you free this evening after work?" Matthew asked me bluntly, and I looked at him in surprise. Matthew glanced up at me from his papers, smiling. "My son is in town, and I can't make dinner. And Emmett refuses to dine alone. Would you mind very much having dinner with him?" My treat, of course. I hesitated for a moment, unsure. Was this some kind of setup? Although it seemed Edward had no problems moving on, I wasn't ready to start dating again. I hadn't gone a date since our breakup last year, and my libido was suffering because of it. When I had been with Edward, all of my needs had been taken care of, and then some. I'm not ready to be with someone else, but I was also missing the benefits of having a man in my life. But that still didn't mean I wanted to be involved with someone. Sensing my hesitation, Matthew smiled easily. "It's not a setup, I promise, Bella," he assured me. "Just dinner with your boss's son. That will be fine." I finally relented. Why would I turn down a free dinner? Although I had never met Emmett McCarty, if he was his father's son then I'm sure he's nice. Plus, I get some brownie points on top of that. "Where should I meet him?" I asked, and Matthew shook his head. "The reservation is early, so I'll just have him pick you up here at the office." "Is that good?" "Yes, that's perfect. Is what I'm wearing all right?" I asked, looking down at my black, quarter-length sleeved dress that I had worn to work. Matthew looked at me briefly before nodding and returning to the papers on his desk. "You look fine. So, Emmett will pick you up at 5. "Thanks, Bella. I appreciate it," Matthew said, and then excused me from his office. I returned to my desk and just as I sat down, Edward walked into the room. He hesitated slightly when he saw me, but then walked right up to my desk. "Bella, could you please give this to Matthew for me?" he asked politely, holding out a manila envelope. "Yeah, sure," I said, taking the envelope. Edward hesitated for a moment, so I continued. "Did they demote you or something? Why are you running envelopes?" I teased, and Edward's eyes widened slightly. I then noticed how tired he looked, with bags under his eyes and a slightly groggy expression. After a moment, he cracked a smile and shook his head. "Nah, I thought I'd get out of the office for a little while," he explained. "I'm on my way to lunch." He hesitated again, fiddling with the keys in his hands. "Would you like to join me?" Edward suddenly asked, and I looked up at him with shock. We remained silent for a moment, and then Edward spoke again. "It's just lunch, Bella." "Really?" he said softly, and I nodded. "Sure," I said, clearing my throat. "Just a second." I quickly closed all of the open programs on my computer and then logged off before letting Matthew know that I was taking my lunch. Then I picked up my purse and followed Edward out of the office towards the elevator. "If you don't mind me asking," Edward glanced over at me as I spoke, a knowing smirk on his face. "Don't you think this would bother Rosalie?" I asked curiously. Edward sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I loved it when he did that. Rosalie and I are hitting a bit of a rough patch. He admitted softly, and I bit my lower lip. And you really think having lunch with your ex-fiancée 2 days in a row? I asked, and Edward rubbed his face with his hands. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for that to sound so snippy. I apologized, touching his shoulder gently. I just know that I wouldn't be too happy if I were in her shoes. Yeah, well, Rosalie is rarely happy about anything. Edward sighed darkly as we walked across the building lobby. I spotted Edward's dark gray car parked at the door, and I was silent until we slipped into the car. Then I decided it was time for me to bring up a tough question that I had been holding back for days now. Edward, if you're so unhappy, why did you even propose to her? I asked, and Edward gaped at me. Oh, come on, when you proposed to me, we were at least happy. A little oblivious, sure, but happy. But you and Rosalie, you don't seem happy at all, I pointed out as Edward pulled out onto the street. He was quiet, and I thought I had offended him until he spoke again. I don't know, Bella. I really don't. I thought I was happy until now. It's confusing and stressful and just difficult. Can I be honest with you? Edward glanced at me questioningly, and I nodded. Rosalie was supposed to be a rebound, nothing more, he said softly, and I stared at him, slack-jawed. Oh, Edward, I whispered, touching his shoulder gently. Why did you do this then? I asked, suddenly angry. It had been 6 months. Why? We could have gotten back together, I exclaimed angrily, and Edward abruptly pulled into a parking garage, screeching into the first available spot. What? He asked, his eyes wide. You were the one who wanted to break up and not even try anymore. I wanted to go to counseling. I wanted to keep trying and get married after we sorted things out together. Bella, you were the one to move out of the apartment and to suggest we break up. And now you're telling me that we could have gotten back together. Edward slammed his hands down on the steering wheel. I bit my lip, staring at him as he stared at me. This is stupid. Please, take me back to the office and we can just forget about this. Edward nodded, but didn't move. And then, he leaned over and kissed me gently. I remained motionless for a moment, and then just melted into him, tangling my fingers into his soft hair as his hands cupped my face. Our lips moved together in sync, pulling and pushing at each other deliciously. And then he pulled away abruptly. I'm so sorry, he said, wiping at his mouth. I don't know, I'll take you back to the office now. Edward, I started to tell him that it was all right, but he cut me off. Please, Bella, no, he said, his voice low. What was that? Edward Anthony Cullen. After I pulled back up to the office building, Bella and I sat in silence for a long moment. Neither of us spoke until Bella gathered the courage to. Let's not talk about this, she said softly, leaning forward and hiding her face with her long brown hair. Goodbye, Edward, I'll see you around, Bella murmured, and then got out of the car. I watched as she straightened her skirt, squared her shoulders, and walked back into the building. Then I swallowed heavily, took a deep breath, and pulled away from the curb to park my car in the garage. By the time I got back to my office, my head was pounding and I could hardly think straight. I shouldn't have kissed Bella, but I honestly didn't regret it in the slightest. I know that it was wrong, but it was also amazing. Bella was always so soft and warm and sweet, and she always had been. I wasn't proud of what I had done. I was committed to Rosalie, at least I thought I was. I needed to slow down and think about what was happening here. After what Bella said this afternoon, I was both relieved and angry. I wished she had told me this sooner. If Bella had said something just 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't be engaged to Rosalie and maybe Bella and I could have made something of our fucked up relationship. But now I was moving on, and Bella deserved to move on as well. I wanted her to be happy, even if that meant we couldn't be together ever again. I sat down at my desk, rubbing my forehead with the palm of my hand. This was too confusing, I can't keep thinking about it. I made a commitment to Rosalie. But I had once made that same commitment to Bella, and look how that turned out. Isabella Marie Swan, stop thinking about it. I scolded myself mentally, trying to focus on my work. But I couldn't stop think about it. I just kept replaying it in my mind, over and over again, the feeling of Edward's lips against mine. It was just as wonderful as I remembered. Soft and sweet, but also longing and passionate. I had kissed other men before Edward, but I had never been kissed like that. I need to stop thinking about it and get on with my life. After what we talked about this afternoon, it's obvious to me that I'm going to need to get over the whole thing and just move on. Edward was. He was going to marry Rosalie, and maybe they could work out the problems they had been experiencing. For a few minutes this afternoon, I hadn't thought of Edward as my ex-fiancé. It was like he was my best friend again. But we were over and done with. Our relationship was over and done with. Emmett was picking me up, and I had no idea why I was so nervous. Matthew had assured me that this wasn't a date or a setup. But I kind of wanted it to be. It would be nice to go out with someone else, get attention from someone else. Dating Edward had always been so wonderful, because he had taken such good care of me and had treated me so well. Probably better than I deserved, given the way I acted in the end. Emmett McCarty, he was something new. Something exciting. And when he finally arrived to pick me up, I knew that he would be an amazing date. He was cute, to say the least. He had dark curly hair like his father's, dimples, and shining hazel eyes. Emmett was also built like a bodybuilder, but the way he smiled at me was sweet and heartwarming. "Hi, Bella, I'm Emmett." He immediately pulled me into a hug upon introductions, squeezing me so tightly I thought I might burst. "I'm Bella," I laughed, and Emmett squeezed me one last time before setting me back down on my feet. As I reached over to pick up my purse, I hesitated for a moment. Edward and Rosalie were standing by the elevators, and while Rosalie was talking to Edward, he was staring right at me, a small frown on his face. Smiling awkwardly, I waved, and Edward nodded and waved back before putting his arm around Rosalie's waist and walking out of the building with her while she continued to talk. I watched them go, and then quickly turned my attention back to Emmett, who was smiling at me expectantly. "Are you ready for dinner?" Emmett asked, and I nodded quickly. "Great, I'm starved," he said cheerfully, and then checked the time on his cell phone. "Come on, let's get going. We can walk to the restaurant, it's only 3 blocks away and it's also in the hotel I'm staying at. Oh, and sorry my dad had you do this, I'm sure you would rather be with your boyfriend than having dinner with me," Emmett said, winking at me. I laughed, shaking my head as Emmett held the door open for me. "Wow, Emmett, you're subtle," I said, rolling my eyes. "But I'd rather be with you, considering I don't have a boyfriend to be with in the first place," I assured him as we set off down the block. Emmett nodded and tapped his head, like he was storing this away for information. "I haven't dated in over a year," I added softly, even though it was probably unnecessary. Emmett cocked his head to the side, looking down at me. "Really? And why is that?" he asked, and I shrugged my shoulders. "I was engaged," I said simply, "and I'm not anymore." I held up my left hand, showing Emmett my ring-free finger. "I haven't really had the urge to date since then." "Oh, I'm sorry," Emmett said, and I nodded shortly. "You still don't want to be with anyone else?" he asked suddenly, looking at me. There was a suggestive gleam in his eye, and I blushed bright red. I wasn't going to lie, I was attracted to Emmett. I had just met him, but he was really cute and his personality was funny and sweet. In fact, Emmett's personality was a lot different than Edward's, which was maybe what I need right now. I looked up at Emmett, biting my lip. "Well, maybe," I said, and then looked back down at my feet. Emmett chuckled next to me, and then gripped my arm and looped it in his. I giggled and looked at him in surprise, but Emmett was staring straight ahead with a smile on his face, so I didn't say anything else. Emmett hadn't asked me if I wanted to date or if I wanted a relationship. He had asked if I wanted to be with anyone. And honestly I did. After a very entertaining dinner, Emmett and I were thrilled to find that the restaurant had a bar. So I was 3 drinks in and having a great time. Well, I was mostly venting about Edward to Emmett. And then 6 months later, he's banging this blonde bitch that looks like a supermodel. I mean, it was 6 fucking months later. I took another shot quickly, grimacing as I did so. And now he's engaged and everyone's saying they're such a cute fucking couple and they're so fucking perfect, God, it makes me sick. I spat, and Emmett threw his head back, laughing hysterically. "You need a nice rebound," Emmett informed me, scooting a little closer and putting his arms around my shoulder. I smiled, partly because of all the alcohol coursing through my system and partly because there was a handsome man who actually wanted me. Edward had gone from me to Rosalie, and that had hurt a little. She looked like a goddamn beauty queen, for fuck's sake. Yeah, maybe I do, I said cheekily, and then stood on my tiptoes to kiss Emmett roughly on the lips. And he kissed me back. This kissing was so much different than kissing Edward. It was rough and feverish and sloppy. And for now, it was great. It worked. I need it. I set my glass down and tangled my fingers in Emmett's curly hair, trying to pull him down to me so we could continue kissing. But it seemed that Emmett had different plans. He kissed me one last time, pushing his tongue into my mouth before pulling away, and grabbed me by the hand. I knew he had a room. I remember him saying that he was staying at this hotel. So I wasn't surprised or taken aback as Emmett led me to the elevator. We were alone, so Emmett pulled me to him again and kissed me hard on the lips, crushing against me so hard that it was almost painful. I was in a haze as Emmett pulled me out of the elevator and towards his hotel room. He already had his room key out, so we didn't have to waste any time fumbling with that. I groaned eagerly as Emmett pulled me into the room and then slammed the door behind us. "Is this okay?" he asked, panting heavily in between kisses. "Yeah, it's good," I panted back, yanking on his hair. "Just I don't want to go too far," I said, and Emmett nodded, picking me up and kissing me even harder as he carried me across the room. He set me on the bed and I raised my arms over my head with hesitation as he started tugging on my dress. I shivered once the cool air hit my bare skin, and Emmett grinned appreciatively at me, waggling his eyebrows. I blushed, glad that I had worn a pretty purple bra and panty set today. Emmett reached down and gently slid off my high heels, letting them clatter to the floor. I groaned as his warm hands worked up my legs, and I reached up to unbutton his shirt readily. In no time at all, we were both naked except for our underwear. Emmett reached for the elastic of my panties, but I caught his hand in mine. "Too far," I whispered softly, and he nodded again in understanding, realizing what I wanted to do. I scooted down slightly and Emmett hovered over me, leaning down to kiss me again. I eagerly lifted one of my legs over his hip, and groaned into his mouth as one of his hands slid down my hip to settle on my ass. Emmett crushed his pelvis to mine, both of us moaning roughly. I tugged on his hair again and moaned throatily, and Emmett took the hint and settled between my legs. As my breathing quickened, I lifted my hips, desperately seeking any kind of friction. Thankfully, I found it. Emmett's weight is on me, but not too heavily. I liked the contact and closeness as we continued to greedily push our pelvic bones against each other. The sensations are hitting me so quickly that I can't even keep my eyes from rolling into the back of my head. I'm withering under him, feeling so much pleasure and pressure and wonderful sensations I can't even fully describe. His eyes meet mine again and our hips shifted together with entirely deliberate thrusts, and I can feel myself quickly falling off of the edge. After several more strong thrusts, I groaned and felt my eyes roll back into my head again as wonderful, unbelievable pleasure spread all throughout my body, burning deliciously. Emmett groaned next, capturing my lips with his one more time before we both exhaled heavily and collapsed into the mattress. He placed a soft kiss on my neck, and I remained silent. I needed that, the release, the pleasure, the sensation. But I feel a little guilty, too, because Emmett wasn't really the one I wanted this with. "Edward Anthony Cullen, what do you observe you need for dinner? I'd cook but I'm completely exhausted, so I think that we have to both pick something up on our manor home, or prevent and consume someplace." Rosalie have been talking in view that we were inside the elevator, but I wasn't even listening anymore. As we stood in the foyer and Rosalie persevered to speak, I saw Bella leaning towards the wall across the room, searching around a little nervously. What become she doing, waiting for a person? My question become quickly spoke back as I saw none other than Emmett McCarty walked as much as her and almost right now pull her right into a hug. I frowned slightly, wondering if she and Emmett had a date. Emmett become a few years younger than me, and his father was one of the associates on the firm. I am guessing that Matthew McCarty arranged this, because Bella was filling in for his non-public assistant this month. Bella must have visible me brazenly staring, because she waved awkwardly, and I straightened up and waved again before turning my interest back to Rosalie. So she changed into going to move on. That became top, proper. Bella deserved to move on. And if she failed to want me, then she ought to have whoever she wants. She may be happy because I'm imagined to be happy with Rosalie, despite the fact that I'm quite positive Rosalie and that I are both depressing in the intervening time. But of course, Rosalie places on the glad face. She needs everybody to peer her lovely splendor and her suitable frame and her flashy engagement ring, not for who she simply is. The thing I really like about Rosalie is that she would not take crap from absolutely everyone. That's what makes her this kind of appropriate prosecutor no one wants to get in her manner. However, it's certainly no longer what makes her a very good female friend. Fiancé. Rosalie is my fiancé, no longer my lady friend. Why did I must hold reminding myself of that? Rosalie stood inside the doorway of our bedroom, a massive smile on her face. I regarded up from my casework, elevating my eyebrows. What, Rose? I murmured, pushing my thick-rimmed glasses higher up my nostril. I needed to put on glasses after I worked at night now, just every other unwelcome signal that even though I'm now not precisely applying for Social Security yet, I get older. I do recognize what Rosalie wishes. I understand that look in her eye. She walked towards me, pulling her shirt over her head as she walked. Yep, she wanted sex. Even though I typically wouldn't have turned her down, this become exclusive. What are you doing? Rosalie asked throatily, sliding onto the bed and twining her thin palms round my neck. Operating, I stated dryly, now not searching up again whilst she kissed my neck and jaw. Perhaps you should try it. Don't you've got stuff to be finished for tomorrow? I knew I was being rude, but simply damn it to hell. I used to be in a shitty mood due to the fact I've made the wrong desire once more, and I needed to take it out on a person. Rosalie pulled far away from me and huffed loudly, putting her hands on her slender hips. What the fuck is your problem? She snapped. If you didn't observe, I used to be seeking to have sex with you. She became getting indignant now, her cheeks turning pink and her eyes narrowing. What is happening, Edward? Inform me. I suppose I should know what is making you so pissy currently. I didn't answer, and Rosalie huffed again, louder this time. Is it because Bella fucking Swan is moving on? She requested, and despite the fact that I didn't visibly react, my pulse quickened on the mention of Bella moving on. Because newsflash, Edward, you have moved on too. If you've forgotten, you requested me to marry you 2 weeks ago. And now you are all lovesick over her again. What's your trouble? Nevertheless, I remained silent, due to the fact I had no concept of what to say. Truly, she turned into proper. She was completely and definitely proper. In fact, I failed to just like the reality that Bella had moved on, despite the fact that I have been the one to have moved on first. That made me a horrific individual, and I knew that. However, it also did not exchange something. Rosalie, please simply drop it. I muttered, collecting up my papers and tossing them on the nightstand. I'm sorry, but I am tired and I am going to mattress. And for the last time, forestall speaking about Bella Swan. She is the closing element I want to talk about with you, Kay. I took off my glasses and set them on the night desk, and Rosalie changed into nonetheless staring me down when I seemed returned towards her. You're an ass. I'm drowsing in the spare room. Rosalie hissed, whacking me inside the arm along with her pillow before stomping out the room. Yeah, she became surely fucking mature. But she turned into nonetheless proper approximately greater matters than one. Isabella Marie Swan. Once I wakened the following morning, I felt terrible. I had a pounding headache, I used to be sore, and that I could take into account the whole thing approximately closing night time. In bright element, look who eventually awoke. I jerked my head up to look Emmett status the entrance, carrying a button-up shirt and an untied tie around his neck. There is aspirin at the counter inside the rest room, he said, taking a chew out of an apple that he turned into preserving. And there may be some stuff for breakfast within the kitchen, in case you're hungry. I nodded dumbly, pulling the sheets in opposition to my naked frame as a blush heated my cheeks. I don't generally do this, I said, and Emmett laughed softly. Yeah, I'm able to tell. Appearance, Bella, it is no big deal. I know you needed that, so simply get on with your lifestyles. You are a high-quality woman, Kay. Edward Cullen is a fucking dumbass for letting you go, Emmett stated, taking every other massive chunk of his apple. At his phrases, my shoulders dropped and I simply began crying. Emmett stared at me in alarm, narrowing his eyes. Fuck, what is incorrect? He asked, and that I shook my head, wiping my eyes. It wasn't his fault, it became me, I whispered, because I couldn't deny the reality to any extent further. Isabella Marie Swan. It wasn't his fault. It turned into me, I whispered, and Emmett stared at me, burdened. What do you imply? He requested cautiously, sitting on a chair next to the bed and propping his elbows up on his lap and resting his chin in his hands. Concept. I shook my head, choosing on the unfastened threads of the comforter. I was so scared, I murmured, looking to parent out a way to give an explanation for this large, complicated state of affairs. We were getting married and our perspectives on existence and on the destiny have been so extraordinary I wasn't even surprised while we started to glide apart. And then when Edward informed me we wanted to talk one night time, I simply made up my mind proper then and there. I wanted to surrender, so I did. After we talked that night time, Edward desired to try to go to counseling in order that we could work matters out. However, I stated that it was over, and we simply had to face it. Edward eventually agreed to a cordial breakup, and it was throughout right then. Emmett stared at me, frowning. But I idea you loved him. He said, sounding absolutely dumbfounded. Oh, I do, I whispered. Like I said, I was scared of how we would make it paintings, so I did not even try in fear of humiliating defeat. Edward become equipped to get married, however I don't without a doubt suppose he became equipped to get married to me. I said, nonetheless questioning if I could get this story out proper. Maybe Rosalie is better for him, although he doesn't suppose so. You guys are pathetic, Emmett said, giggling. Bella, I assume you are nevertheless into this guy, and that I guess he is nevertheless into you. Simply get your head out of your ass and face the track. Remedy the hassle. He entreated, and I started out to giggle at Emmett's blunt procedures. I am being extreme here. He stated sternly, pointing his index finger at me. Have you ever even talked to him about it? I hissed before answering, because I was so painfully aware that I used to be sporting not anything however my bra and underwear beneath of my blanket. However then I persevered besides. The day passed. He kissed me after telling me that he wasn't happy with Rosalie and then he got all awkward and took me back to work. I blurted out. Emmett shook his head, taking a very last little bit of his apple earlier than tossing it within the trash. Speak to him. He stated truly, and then checked his watch and stood up. It changed into high quality gaining knowledge of you, Bella. I know things went a bit a ways final night however no difficult emotions, proper. Nope, none. We have been each inebriated, and it become fun. I said, blushing. I truly wanted that. It changed into great learning you, too. I'll see you round. Emmett nodded, kissed the top of my head, and then walked out of the resort room. I stayed within the bed for a moment longer, rubbing my temples. Last night were true. I hadn't felt so true in a long time, and I would had a number of amusing. It have been spontaneous and specific, but now I needed to get lower back to the actual trouble to hand. The difficulty between Edward and I used to be getting increasingly more complicated. Emmett thought I used to be into Edward, however I knew that truly, I was in love with him still. But with the addition of Rosalie into his lifestyles, matters had come to be plenty tougher. We could not just communicate things out and then get lower back together. He had made a dedication to some other girl. Too many thoughts have been flooding my head. Edward had advised me he wasn't happy, and neither became Rosalie. I saw them collectively, and although they normally looked quite content material, I wager Edward could know better than I did, seeing as he became the one inside the courting. After laying there for several extra minutes I dragged myself out of the bed and put on my dress and heels from closing night time. Thank God it become Saturday, due to the fact in any other case I must do the walk of disgrace through the office and I might not have loved that. Especially in the front of Edward and Rosalie. After scribbling Emmett a simple observe and leaving it at the nightstand, I grabbed my purse and headed on my manor. The downtown region became packed, and I needed to clamber through thick groups of tourists to get onto the metro. Not like most of the people at my paintings, I didn't have the cash to pay for parking every unmarried day, and gas turned into expensive enough already. By the point I in the end were given home, I felt grimy and exhausted. I jumped into the shower and after I used to be done I noticed that I had gotten a textual content from Alice late ultimate night. Dinner the next day night. My parents can be there, and so will Edward and Rosalie. You don't need to come in case you do not feel relaxed, I just concept I'd ask. Alice. Staring down at my cell phone for a moment, I idea it over. I loved Esme and Carlisle and Alice. Not anything could trade that. However, Edward and Rosalie, that changed into an exclusive story. Perhaps I have to go, and notice how they have interaction for with my own 2 eyes. In the event that they seem satisfied, I'm accepting that he has moved on for properly, and that what occurred the other day became not anything more than an accident. But in any other case, I suppose I want to have a good long talk with Edward Cullen. Mary Alice Cullen. I stared down at my cell phone nervously, thinking why Bella still hadn't texted me lower back. I had dispatched her a text ultimate night, and she or he had but to reply. I thought maybe she changed into mad, at first. This dinner invitation did mean that she'd need to be round Edward and Rosalie, however it had additionally just been an offer. I hadn't visible enough of my quality friend currently, and that I knew that even my mother and father have been missing her. And if seeing Bella made Rosalie mad, that turned into simply something that she might need to deal with. Notwithstanding my previous mistakes, Bella was nonetheless my pleasant buddy. Sighing dejectedly, I decided to head and pick out an outfit for this night. I left my cell phone on the desk inside the lobby, hoping that maybe once I got here again downstairs Bella would have texted me returned. After choosing my ensemble for the evening, I moved quickly, returned downstairs and changed into relieved to see that Bella had in the end texted me lower back. I will be there. But I need to talk to you beforehand, Bella. I frowned, shooting off a quick respond. Dinner is at 7, I will be at your house by means of 6, after which we will move collectively. Sound exact, Alice? Bella responded after some seconds. Yeah, see then you, Bella. And that turned into all. I wondered what Bella had to speak to me about, especially since she have been so cryptic via textual content. Bella typically positioned matters proper out in the open, mainly when she became talking to me. But perhaps this becomes something extra severe. Perhaps, just maybe, she became gaining a bit perspective. Isabella Marie Swan. As I waited for Alice, I was nervously pacing around my bedroom. I was dressed already, wearing a plain black dress and heels. But my wardrobe wasn't what I was worried about, it was this whole evening. I must be some kind of masochist to be agreeing to this dinner. If it were just Esme and Carlisle and Alice, I would have no problem with going. But when you added Edward and Rosalie to the equation, I was practically digging myself a grave. I don't want to break up a couple, I don't want to be that kind of woman. But if Edward truly isn't happy, I'm not going to let him go into this without knowing how I truly feel. Nothing has really changed between us. I still want the same things, and as far as I know, so does Edward. I don't know if I should even try again, or if I should just let him be. I knew that Alice's opinion wasn't exactly impartial, but it was at least something. I was a complete mess, I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was still in love with my ex-fiancé. Thankfully, the doorbell rang before I could beat myself up about it, and I hurried to get the door. Alice was standing on my porch, wearing a green dress and smiling brightly. She breezed right past me into the house, dropping her purse on the table by the door as she passed. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Alice asked, and I turned around to see her walking down the hallway towards my bedroom. Where are you going?" I asked, shutting the front door and hurrying after Alice. Sure enough, she had gone into my bedroom and was already digging through my closet. "Alice, no, come on, I'm already dressed and ready to go, I just wanted to talk to you about something." Alice didn't answer, she just continued to flip through my clothes busily. I huffed loudly and crossed my arms over my chest, waiting for her to finish. I knew better than to come between Alice Cullen and a closet. Finally, she answered me. "Are you aware that lately, all you've worn is black?" she asked, and I started to tell her she was crazy until I realized that she was right. For the past week or so, my wardrobe has consisted of mainly black. It wasn't a choice I had been making consciously, I hadn't even realized until now. "I guess not," I mumbled, and Alice triumphantly pulled a hanger out of my closet, holding it up for me to see. It was a blue dress that I hadn't worn in ages, but it used to be one of my favorites. And if I remembered correctly, it had been one of Edward's favorites as well. I blushed, shaking my head. "Alice, I can't wear that dress," I said, starting to protest. "Please, Bella, blue looks so good on you," Alice pleaded. "Just put this on and then we can talk. I won't try and reorganize your wardrobe or anything," she said, and I rolled my eyes before yanking the dress away from her. I unzipped my black dress, letting it pool at my feet in a puddle of black fabric. I pulled the blue dress on, and then turned to Alice, putting my hands on my hips. "There, are you satisfied?" I asked snippily, and Alice nodded, sticking her nose up in the air. "Good. Sit down, we need to talk," I said. Alice did as I said, sitting down on my bed patiently. "All right, let's talk," she said simply, and I sat down next to her. Now that the moment was here, I had no idea how to get this out. How was I supposed to tell Alice that I still loved her brother, and that I wanted to be with him again? I was silent for several minutes, and Alice just waited for me to gain the courage to speak. Finally, after a little while, I looked Alice in the eye. "I think I'm still in love with Edward, Alice, and I'm so confused," I confessed, and Alice raised her eyebrows at me. "I know that nothing between us has really changed. But seeing him with Rosalie, it's just reminding me of how much I loved him," I whispered. "Tell me the truth, Alice. Do you think Edward and Rosalie are happy?" I asked, and Alice pursed her lips. "I think they could be," she said calmly, looking down at her hands. "But I also think that Edward won't let go of you, and that Rosalie sees that. And because of that she's pushing him further away by picking fights and bringing up sore subjects," she explained slowly, still not looking me straight in the eye. "If you are still in love with Edward, I suggest that you make up your mind and do what you think is right. This is your decision, Bella, not mine. I've meddled so much in the past, and I've learned that I'm not good at it. Honestly, I cause more problems than I solve. I'm not going to tell you to go to Edward. I'm telling you that I'll support any decision you make." Alice finished with a deep breath, and then met my eyes and smiled sweetly. "You're my best friend, Bella. I would love to see you and my brother work things out. But again, it's up to you. And Edward, I suppose." Nodding, I was quiet again. I was just as confused as I was before, maybe even more so. But at least I knew what I was going to do. Edward at least deserved to know how I felt. If he doesn't want to leave Rosalie, then fine. That's his decision. But I can't hold this feeling back any longer. My relationship with Edward was wonderful before we both stopped trying. Maybe if we hadn't, we would have been married by now. Maybe we could have gone to a counselor and worked things out. But maybe we wouldn't have. Esme Ann Platt Cullen. I twisted my napkin in my hands nervously, my eyes glued to the door. Every time it opened, I jumped in both nervousness and anticipation. "Calm down," Carlyle said calmly, pouring me a glass of wine and resting his hand comfortingly on my shoulder. "You're on pins and needles." "Yes, well, I'm nervous," I replied, taking a small sip of my wine. "I love Bella, Carlyle. I love the girl like she's my own daughter. But I don't want to see her hurting, and I'm sure Rosalie will take one look at her and inflict as much hurt as possible." I tittered, and Carlyle sighed again. "If Edward and Bella really want to move on, then they should," I added simply. Carlyle nodded, taking a drink of his own wine. "I know. But they're both too stubborn to face the music. You know that, Esme. Just let the whole thing drop," he advised. "I think Bella can fend for herself," he added, and I had to agree with that. In the time that I had known Bella Swan, she had always stood up for herself. Sometimes it wasn't obvious, though, especially in situations like these. I glanced towards the door again, and I tugged on Carlyle's arm anxiously. Edward and Rosalie had entered the restaurant, both of their faces pinched. "Be nice," Carlyle said softly, and I rolled my eyes. I was always nice, and sometimes that was one of my major quality flaws. Edward and Rosalie made their way over to the table, and Carlyle and I both stood up as they approached. "Rosalie, Edward, it's nice to see you," Carlyle said cheerfully, hugging Edward and Rosalie. I did the same, kissing my son's cheek as we embraced. I frowned slightly when I saw the uneasiness in his eyes. I didn't like seeing my son like this. Rosalie looked around as we all sat down again, and unfolded her napkin on her lap. "Are Bella and Alice here yet?" she asked stiffly, and Edward stared down at his lap as Carlyle told her that they hadn't arrived yet. "Good," she muttered under her breath, and I shot Carlyle an exasperated look. He shook his head, and no one spoke. At first, Rosalie had been a nice girl. But ever since she and Edward got engaged, I was surprised to see her obvious change in demeanor and behavior. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a feeling that it had something to do with Isabella Swan. Isabella Marie Swan. I fidgeted nervously with my purse as Alice and I walked into the restaurant. I couldn't believe I was doing this to myself, practically throwing myself into the lion's den. Alice spotted her family and Rosalie immediately, and steered me in the right direction over to their table. "Don't be so nervous. You look like you're about to upchuck," Alice hissed under her breath, just as we approached the table, where everyone but Rosalie had stood up. Edward yanked on Rosalie's shoulder, and she gave him a dirty look before standing up as well. "It's nice to see you," Esme said, and she and Carlisle both hugged me warmly before turning to their daughter. I hesitated for a moment, but then gave Edward a short, awkward hug. "Hello, Bella," he said, dropping his arms back down to his sides and looking down at the ground. Rosalie was staring at me, and I shook her hand quickly without saying anything. Thankfully, Alice saved me for any more awkwardness by hugging her brother and then giving Rosalie a hug as well. Ever since the engagement party, I've noticed that Alice hasn't been as friendly towards Rosalie, and she's been much more attentive towards me. It was a nice change, honestly. The six of us all sat down at the table, and I was seated right between Esme and Alice, but Edward was sitting directly across from me. And Rosalie was still staring at me. Esme and Carlisle and Alice kept the conversation flowing, but I was too nervous to get into the conversation. Edward was talking, but Rosalie would barely say anything. I was this close to just leaving and letting them have a normal, family dinner. The only reason this dinner was awkward was because I had shown up with Alice. "Bella, how have your college classes been going?" Esme asked, and my head shot up. I had been focusing on the pattern of the tablecloth, not listening to what the others had been saying. "What? Oh, school has been fine," I said easily, taking a sip of my wine. "It's a little hard getting things done when I'm working from 9 to 5 during the week, but it's not too bad, I manage just fine," I said. "I've been having a lot of late nights lately, but that's been the worst of it." Esme and Carlisle nodded. Alice started talking again. Rosalie stared down at her napkin, and Edward was tracing his long index finger around the rim of his wine glass, and up and down the stem of the glass. I watched him, spacing out the entire time Alice talked. I wanted this as to be over. Why had I even come? This was a sick, twisted form of torture that I had inflicted on myself. And why? What was even the point? "Can you stop fucking staring at him?" My head shot up again at the sound of Rosalie's voice, and I stared at her with wide eyes. "What?" I sputtered, and Alice gently put her hand on my arm. Rosalie glared at me, and I thought that her eyes were going to cut straight into the skin with the intensity of her stare. "You heard me. Stop looking at him," she hissed, jutting her chin out towards Edward. He stared at her, his mouth opened slightly in surprise. He reached out for her arm, but Rosalie yanked away from him. "You broke up, okay? You fucking broke up a year ago. Stop looking at him, stop talking to him, and stop fucking hanging around him." She spat, the volume of her voice escalating. Edward started to speak, but Esme cut him off. Who Edward spends his time with is his business, and the same goes for Bella. Esme said coolly, her eyes narrowed. "And I don't appreciate you speaking to a family friend like that," she added, and Rosalie's face tightened slightly, and I saw her purse her lips. I sat rigidly in my seat, waiting to see what she would do next. I didn't have to wait long. "She's not a family friend," Rosalie shouted, bringing her fists down on the table loudly. Several people seated around us looked over their shoulders at us, their eyes wide as they whispered to each other. "She's your son's ex-fiancée, that's all. She's my best friend," Alice said sharply, and before Rosalie could say anything else, Edward stood up and pulled Rosalie up as well, gripping her firmly by the arm. "Stop it," he said in a low, calm voice. "Don't take this out on the members of my family." Rosalie glared at him, but didn't say anything. "We'll be outside for a moment." Edward sighed stiffly, and then he looked towards me. "Bella," he started to say something, and then he stopped and turned around to walk out of the restaurant with Rosalie on his heels. We sat in silence for a moment, and then I gathered the courage to stand up. "I have to say something," I mumbled, and although Alice grabbed for my hand to hold me back, I walked away before she could stop me. It was crowded outside of the restaurant, so I made my way through the crowd, looking for Edward and Rosalie. Luckily, it didn't take me long to find them. They were standing in the alleyway, and their body language was tense. I slowly approached them, wondering if I should just shut up and go back inside. But before I could decide, Rosalie spotted me and sneered. "Well, isn't that convenient? There she is." Edward turned around to face me as well, his features contorted with anger. "Bella, go back inside," he said, but Rosalie stepped towards me, grabbed a handful of my hair, and yanked hard before I could even blink. And that did it. I was sick of her snide looks and rude comments, and I was sick of the fact that she had Edward when I was still so in love with him. So I smacked her across her pretty little face and watched with satisfaction as she released my hair and brought her hand to my cheek. "You fucking whore," she hissed, and smacked me. I moved back, and as she advanced towards me with her fist clenched, I honestly thought that she was going to punch me. But she wailed on Edward instead, punching him square in the jaw. Rosalie must not have been packing much of a punch, because Edward barely reacted, just rubbed his jaw for a moment. "Bella, go back inside," he repeated, and Rosalie looked from him to me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Tell Carlisle and Esme and Alice that we're leaving, please." And with that, they were both gone, leaving me standing in the alley with the cool night air stinging my sore cheek. "Edward Anthony Cullen, do you mind telling me what the fuck you have been even thinking, Rosalie?" I requested angrily, and Rosalie took a step towards me, her hands on her hips and menace in her blue eyes. "Pricey God, Edward, don't even get me began. I have needed to take a seat returned and watch the two of you lust after each different ever given that we got engaged a fucking month ago. And you realize what? It's unexpectedly crystal clean that you don't even want to be engaged to me anymore, ever due to the fact that that female came returned into the picture. So why don't you tell me what the fuck you were questioning?" Rosalie snapped, her voice growing an octave. "You made a commitment to me, Edward Cullen. Right here I used to be, thinking you were so head over heels in love with me, proposing to me after 6 months. However, you're virtually nonetheless hot on your ex. Do you recognize what that feels like?" she requested. I shook my head, pinching the bridge of my nostril between my thumb and index finger. "I recognize that I have now not been truthful to you. However, Rosalie, this sounds terrible, however." Rosalie's face abruptly contorted in disgust, and I trailed off. "Nicely, isn't that handy? There she is," Rosalie stated snidely, and that I turned around to look Bella drawing close as, looking cautious. The final thing I desired to do changed into get Bella concerned within the middle of this. Properly, technically she was already within the center of our fight, however right now she simply had to get herself out of right here. "Bella, cross lower back inner," I said sharply. However, Rosalie reacted earlier than Bella did. In a breakup 2D, Rosalie progressed and yanked on Bella's lengthy brown hair, an infantile riot. I thought Bella could step again and leave, but of course, she wasn't going to let it drop that without difficulty. Without some other second of hesitation, Bella slapped Rosalie across the face, a successful appearance on her face as Rosalie released her grip on Bella's hair to grab at her cheek. "You fucking whore," Rosalie stated via her tooth, her face absolutely overtaken with rage as she smacked Bella proper in the face. As I reached out to forestall her, Rosalie clenched her fist and punched me instantly inside the jaw. I right now added my hand up to my jaw, rubbing barely. In spite of all her communicate, Rosalie wasn't exactly a fighter. The blow to my jaw wouldn't have hurt in any respect, except for the truth that Rosalie became wearing numerous earrings on her fingers. And that changed into it. This engagement, if you can genuinely call it that, changed into over. "Bella, move again interior," I stated for the second time, and Rosalie looked between the two of us, respiration heavily and nevertheless searching, actually furious. "Tell Carlisle and Esme and Alice that we are leaving, please." Then I grabbed Rosalie by using the elbow and led her off, determined to position and cease to this once and for all. The door slammed in the back of us, and Rosalie and that I stared at each other with uncertainty in our eyes. Neither people desired to talk first, however it needed to be executed. We each knew what become coming. "What do you want to do?" Rosalie's voice became flat and without any emotion. She just stared at me with empty, unfeeling eyes as she spoke. I rubbed the return of my neck, remaining my eyes as I attempted to kind out my thoughts. I had been at this level in a dating earlier than, with Bella. However, this was a lot one of a kind. While Bella and I had discovered ourselves at an end, I had wanted not anything more than to work matters out. Bella were the one to convince me we ended to step again and permit every other go. I had tried. I had attempted to move on with Rosalie, but it had made my trouble even larger. I felt like I owed Rosalie something, even notion all I desired to do became to make matters exercise session with Bella. Subsequently, I found the proper phrases for what I needed to say to Rosalie. I are aware of it seems like I have been pushing you away. But simply, I'm no longer pushing you away. I'm simply so fucking confused, and I am hurting, and I am surely not over my closing relationship. It truly is just the honest-to-God reality. I let matters circulate way too speedy between us, which became not proper inside the slightest. I said, and Rosalie nodded barely, crossing her fingers over her chest and looking down at the ground. Are you going to, she cleared her throat, looking back up at me. Are you going to move again to Bella? I suggest now that matters among us have modified. I sighed, putting my face in my arms. Rosalie, in all truth, nothing has changed among us. None of the intimacy that we've has been misplaced. I simply want to discover my emotions for someone else, it's all that has clearly changed. I did love you. Hell, I still do. But not inside the way that I ought to. And you definitely can't make the coronary heart experience something it might not, and mine simply won't. I murmured, and Rosalie inhaled sharply at my phrases. I used to be happy, even though. I delivered, feeling responsible for what I had put Rosalie through in these remaining 6 months. Rosalie shook her head, her glassy blue eyes complete of unshed tears. Edward, you did not smile sufficient. Saying that you had been glad and looking at her completely various things. Then she closed her eyes, shaking her head. I saw a tear slide down her cheek, but she made no flow to wipe it away and simply let it fall. You realize, I simply cannot see myself with you whilst I'm 80. Rosalie said softly. I tried. I attempted to photograph us together in the destiny, however I just cannot. Mainly in the past week it's been definitely not possible. So do you need to wait and determine it out or simply cease things now? Rosalie asked awkwardly, and I shrugged my shoulders. I'm sorry, however I understand now that I'm no longer over Bella. I cannot be with you while I'm nevertheless in love with another female. This is now not truthful to all and sundry. I stated softly. This sounds terrible, however we ought to not have started dating so quickly. Perhaps if I had allowed myself time to recover from Bella, you and I may want to have clearly worked. That become entirely my fault, and that I realize it. Taking a breakthrough, Rosalie slid the hoop off her ringer and exceeded it lower back to me. I know. I imply. I knew you weren't over your ex when we started seeing every other. I should have prevented this simply as a lot as you could have. I nodded wordlessly, searching down on the ring in my hand. I failed to need this anymore. Circle of relatives heirloom, be damned. I need to be pleasant, K. I realize that sounds stupid, however I do. Rosalie stated carefully. Now not right now, I suppose that proper now we just need to stay away from every other. That would probably be for the best. I agreed, dropping the hoop at the espresso desk without hesitation. I assume I'd go away DC for a little whilst. I said, searching out the window rather than at Rosalie. Perhaps, I do not know. Rosalie nodded, after which I hugged her gently, now not positive of what to do. I bet I ought to get my stuff together. It's an excellent component we didn't have my crammed all moved in, huh? She joked lightly, however then her expression right now became somber once more. I am sorry I punched you. She whispered, and that I cracked a smile, touching my jaw gently. Didn't without a doubt hurt besides for your damn jewelry. I said softly, smirking at her. I am sorry I handled you so badly during the last month. I am going to express regret to Bella, with the aid of the manor. Rosalie said, I owe her that, absolutely. She stated, and that I noticed a blush on her cheeks. But could you please make an apology for your dad and mom and sister for me? I don't think I will face them after what passed off this night. Also, I'm sorry for performing like any such large bitch. We both laughed softly at that, after which in reality stared at each other for a protracted moment. Then I improved, kissed Rosalie softly on the forehead, and advised her to take her time getting the whole thing out of the apartment. I had some commercial enterprise to take care of. Isabella Marie Swan, Carlyle, Esme, and Alice have been not surprised once I advised them that Rosalie and Edward had left. In reality, they failed to even seem to care approximately something except for the truth that Rosalie had been impolite. Thank God they failed to understand she had slapped me and punched Edward. Oh, honey, I am sorry approximately that, Esme started out, however I shook my head, reducing her off. It wasn't your fault, Esme, no longer inside the slightest. I should have acknowledged something like that would have passed off. And besides, I think Rosalie has been loss of life to say that to my face on account that for the past week. I admitted, and anybody laughed lightly, looking to pull away from the awkwardness. Appearance, I do not mean to be rude, but I assume I'm simply going to go domestic, K. These days has been type of long and traumatic. Esme shook her head quickly, leaning over to kiss me at the cheek. No, you go on domestic. It's exceptional. Just lay down and loosen up and find a few peace. She said, and that I smiled graciously at her earlier than pronouncing goodbye to Alice and Carlyle and leaving the restaurant. Seeing that Alice had driven me right here, I made my way down to the metro, fishing around in my purse for my MetroCard as I rode down the escalator. Just as I reached the bottom, I felt a hand on my shoulder and jerked round. Emmett McCarty stood at the back of me, grinning extensively. I comfy right now once I saw that it was him. Hello, Bella. Long term no see. Emmett joked, maintaining up with me as I walked in the direction of the opposite escalator that led towards the platform. It is top to see you too, Emmett. I laughed, turning round to completely face him. My train wasn't due for another 10 minutes or so. When are you getting out of Metropolis? I asked. Oh, every time, Emmett said, shrugging. I am doing some paintings right here, however I do not actually have any time restrictions. So, wherein have been you, little woman? He requested, searching at my fancy get dressed and high heels. We're given a hot date. He guessed, and I just needed to chortle at that. Come on, Bella, that is no longer a not possible state of affairs. You are a beautiful lady. Emmett stated kindly, and that I could not assist but blush. No, really, I laughed ruefully. I used to be simply as dinner with my ex-fiancé, his present-day fiancé, and his family. I said tightly, and Emmett made a horrified face. It wasn't that horrific. I am nevertheless friends together with his family, but his fiancé ended up slapping me inside the face and punching Edward inside the jaw. I admitted, and Emmett's mouth dropped open. So I decided it was time to depart. Emmett shook his head, looking bewildered. Yeah, he laughed. You motive a variety of issues, Swan. He requested teasingly, and that I rolled my eyes. But hello, significantly, did making a decision about your ex? Emmett asked, his face becoming serious once more almost right away. I sighed, shrugging my shoulders. Properly after nowadays, I suppose he and Rosalie are over. I confessed. I mean, she punched him in the face and he looked pretty mad, they both did. However, if they genuinely are over, the first element I need to do is simply speak to Edward. Such a lot of matters approximately our courting and our breakup nevertheless confuse me. I defined, and Emmett nodded his head in information. It's just silly and complex right now, but thanks on your help and recommendation. I stated. You are an awesome buddy, considering we just met remaining weekend and got a touch frisky. I stated, and Emmett and that I laughed collectively simply as my train approached. Well, I will probably see you across the workplace or something. Bye, Emmett, I said, giving him a brief hug and % on the cheek. Thank you again. No hassle, Bella. I will see you. Emmett gave a small wave as I stepped at the train and quick observed a seat, looking him as he walked to the other aspect of the platform to look forward to his very own teach. As the Educate pulled far from the station, I was deep in thought. I knew Edward and Rosalie had been going to break up. I had visible the appearance in his eyes. But I had to remind myself that just because he and Rosalie have been through did not mean he desired me, now not necessarily. Rosalie Lillian Hale, for some cause, I had concept that greater of my matters were in Edward's townhouse. We had best been dwelling together for a touch at the same time as, and I hadn't gotten all my stuff to his region but, however nevertheless simplest 4 bins. The townhouse still regarded full. Not anything even appeared out of area. After daring for most effective a bit over 6 months, our matters hadn't meshed collectively and nothing had definitely been ours. It had been mine or his. It had been 3 hours, and Edward nevertheless wasn't back, which I used to be thankful for. He had stated I could sleep here tonight, but I in reality simply wanted to head lower back to my vintage rental and be on my own. I had carried out loads of factors tonight and it turned into all extraordinarily overwhelming. I knew that I needed to say I used to be sorry to Bella despite the fact that she become absolutely the ultimate character in the international that I wanted to peer, not to mention express regret to. Despite the fact that Edward hadn't said it instantly out, I knew that he became going to attempt his hardest to get back collectively with her. I had refused to see it earlier then, however it turned into now painfully apparent that Edward changed into now not over Bella, now not within the slightest. I had known it, but had refused to simply accept it. So now, I was harmed and by myself, and it was my fault just as much as it changed into Edward's. I shouldn't have started out dating him. I should not have agreed to marry him once I knew that he changed into still now not over his ex-fiancée. But I had, and there was nothing that I should do about it now. Isabella Marie Swan. My plans for the rest of the night included my couch, my DVD collection, and a box of ice cream sandwiches. I left my fancy dress out on my bed and pulled on an old pair of sweats, grateful to be comfortable. After letting my hair down and washing my face, I made my way to the living room and just before I plopped down on the couch, there was a knock on my door. Grumbling to myself, I lugged myself over to the door and wrenched it open, nearly falling over in shock when I saw Edward standing there in front of me. He was still wearing his suit from earlier, but his bronze hair was even more mussed than normal and his eyes looked beautiful as always, but they also looked odd. Relieved, but also unsure. "Hi," he said in a low voice, and I continued to just stare at him. Hi, Edward," I finally said, shifting on my feet and leaning against the doorframe. Why, what's up?" I asked awkwardly, folding my arms across my chest and looking up into Edward's green eyes. Edward closed his eyes for a moment, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Rosalie and I broke up. For good," he said, his voice heavy. "Just now, after we got back from that stupid dinner." Edward told me, and I just nodded, not knowing what else I could really do. I had seen this coming, it had been obvious to me. But I wondered what had been the final straw for them. "May I ask, what was the straw that broke the camel's back?" I asked meekly, and Edward smiled ruefully, shaking his head back and forth with a soft laugh. "Edward, really, what happened?" I persisted. "Was it because of what happened tonight? Or was it just something else?" I asked lamely. Edward sighed, leaning against my doorframe. "Can I come in?" he asked softly, not answering me. Wordlessly, I stepped aside and let him walk into my living room. I shut the door behind him, and turned around, leaning back against the wall and waiting for Edward to answer my question. He ran his fingers along the edge of the small wooden table in the hallway, looking down at his feet. Finally, after a few moments of complete silence, he spoke. "Our breakup, it wasn't just because of tonight. It was because Rosalie and I both finally accepted that I am still completely in love with you." Edward sighed, his voice low and rough. I stared at him, unable to form coherent thoughts, let alone words. "Because I do," Edward continued, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Dear God, Bella, I still love you. I was so wrong for ever letting you walk out of my life, and I want you back. I want everything that you want." Edward sighed, and I continued to stare at him, completely bewildered. My thoughts and emotions were all over the place, scattered across my mind. I knew I loved Edward, but I honestly did not see how he and I would be able to work out our differences. So I told him that, "Edward, you and I still want completely different things," I whispered, my eyes welling up with tears. "I haven't changed, and I know that you haven't either. I can." Edward sighed, taking a desperate step closer to me. "I can change, Bella. Just give me a little time. I just want to be with you now. I wasted too much time being selfish and only looking out for myself, and I know that I can't get that time back." He was practically pleading with me no, but I still didn't see how he would be able to accept the things that I wanted in my life. "Edward, I still want to have a baby. I still want that house in the suburbs with the picket fence and the lawn and the dog. I would love to have that with you, but I can't let you force yourself into doing all of that just because you want to be with me. Edward shook his head, taking yet another step closer to me. He grabbed both of my hands in his, grasping them tightly and pulling me against me. Do you still love me, Bella? Because if you do, I will do anything to be with you again. You want a baby. I can handle that. The suburbs, the dog, even the goddamn picket fence. I would love it because I love you, and I love being with you. And I know that now, Bella, I do. Please, just because I was too much of an ass to see it before. I do love you. I interrupted him. But I can't just give in to you like this, especially because of our history. I can't just drop everything and run into your arms anymore, Edward. I used to do that, but I'm not really that kind of person now. I took a deep breath, leaning my forehead against Edward's shoulder. I do love you, I repeated, but please, give me some time. I whispered, I need time, I need to sort things out. Can you do that? Can we be just us for a while before we decide to move on to something more? Us? Edward asked, and I nodded my head, still leaning against him. Bella, we're always us, and we always have been. This right here, this is us, he said, and I shook my head in frustration. We can take things slow, Bella, if that's what you mean. Edward sighed, and I nodded, pulling away from him. Do you want to stay for a little while? I asked, gesturing to the couch and the movies sitting out on the coffee table. Edward chuckled slightly despite the heavy emotions in the air, and hesitantly kissed the top of my head. Of course. Edward Anthony Cullen, do you want to stay for a little while? Bella asked, waving her arm over to the living room, where the television was on and the lights were off. The emotions in the air were nearly stifling, but I knew that I wanted to stay here with Bella more than anything. Of course, I said, after kissing the top of her head. Bella, still holding my hands, led me over to the couch. We sat down, both a little unsure and awkward. Before our breakup last year, movie night would have led to a heavy make-out session and then sex. But I had to remind myself that we were taking things slow. Even though I loved Bella, we had to pretend that this relationship was new, because we really did need a fresh start. What did you want to watch? I asked, picking up the pile of DVDs sitting on the coffee table. Bella hesitantly leaned against me, looking at the DVDs. I could smell her sweet freesia body wash and strawberry shampoo, and I smiled at the familiarity of the whole thing. We were so lucky to be able to start this over again. I was so lucky to have gotten her back. Would you be opposed to watching Nurse Jackie, Season 1? Bella asked, picking up the DVD case. I nodded, and watched as she wordlessly got up off the couch and inserted the DVD. Do you want some ice cream? I have some in the freezer. Bella asked softly, and then when I said, yes, please, she hurried off to the kitchen and returned with 2 ice cream sandwiches. I don't really know what to do, Bella said, looking down at the couch as she handed me the ice cream sandwich and the previews started playing for the DVD. I mean, how are we supposed to do this? I want nothing more than to be close to you, but I know that we need to move slower, she said, her voice revealing the frustration that we were both feeling. Let's just take it slow, Bella repeated, and then sat down next to me on the couch, leaning her head against my shoulder as she pressed the play button. It was more difficult than I had originally expected. I had no idea how tempting it would be, sitting here with Bella watching a seemingly harmless television show. But it was. The lights were low, the characters in the television show kept having quickies in the pharmacy, and Bella was just sitting there, licking the ice cream and chocolate off of her slender fingers. It wasn't just difficult, it was actually a form of torture. But I controlled myself and my behavior. Bella was the one acting out, honestly. I smiled when she laid down and placed her head in my lap, smiling up at me before refocusing on the television. I played with the ends of her long brown hair, watching her, completely mesmerized. All too soon, we had watched all the episodes on the disc and it was time for me to head home, even though Rosalie was probably still at my place. Bella. I shook her shoulder softly, and she sat up, tucking her hair behind her ears as she did so. Thank you so much, I said softly, rubbing her shoulder gently. You and we can do this. I know that this time around, I could never bear to lose you. I was stupid last time and I won't lose you like that ever again. I swore, and Bella smiled, threading her fingers through my messy hair. I know. I feel the same way, Edward. Bella said softly. I have to get going. I said grudgingly. But I need to tell you something. After what happened with you and Rosalie, I think that maybe I should take a little bit of time off of work. Bella raised her eyebrows, but I continued what I was planning to say. Look, I know that I now want to share my life with you. But before we settle down and actually, get serious, I want to do something. I want to travel and get some things done before we make a big commitment. I explained. Bella nodded hesitantly, her hands still in my hair. Wait, so now that we're back together, you're going to leave? She asked incredulously. Single quote. I shook my head quickly, gently squeezing her shoulder. Bella, yes, I want to leave. But I also want you to come with me. I explained. Just take a month or two off of work and let's just get out of here. Bella stared at me, her gorgeous brown eyes wide and stunned. You want to go away together, now? I thought we were going to be taking this slow. Bella said, her voice higher than usual. I think that's too fast. It doesn't have to be a big deal. But if you think it's too fast, we could just put it off. But I do want to go away with you, I said softly kissing the top of Bella's head. Bella hesitated again, her brow furrowing. Just let me think about it, okay? I'll get back to you. I nodded, hugging her tightly. I'll see you tomorrow, right? Maybe we could have lunch together. Or we could get together after work for dinner. She asked hopefully. I laughed and agreed, and then Bella walked me over to her front door. I guess I'll just see you at the office, Bella murmured, and then looked up at me, her face etched with uncertainty. Are you going to kiss me? She asked, and I smiled down at her. Cupping her heart-shaped face in my hands, I very tenderly captured her lips in mine. I didn't want to take things too far, so I kissed her briefly before saying my goodbyes. Esme Ann Platt Cullen. I wasn't surprised when my son called and advised me that he and Rosalie have been not together. And I actually wasn't surprised whilst he stated that he and Bella had been lower back together. Because it changed into apparent to absolutely everyone, besides for perhaps Edward and Bella, that they were always intended to emerge as together. Numerous idiotic choices would never change that. What are you smiling approximately? Carlyle requested, taking walks into the living room and dropping his briefcase at the ground as he leaned over the again of the sofa to provide me a soft kiss at the lips. Oh, Edward and Bella are again together, I stated, trying and failing miserably to sound nonchalant. Carlyle raised his eyebrows at me, immediately interested, and sat down on the sofa subsequent to me. He just known as, I explained. I bet that ultimate night, after dinner, he and Rosalie broke up. And then he went over to Bella's condo and instructed her that he became nevertheless in love together with her. I knew they might come to be getting lower back together. I told you so, I said thankfully. Carlyle chuckled, strolling certainly one of his arms via his hair. You are in rare form, he stated, after which paused. Do you suspect Edward and Bella can make their dating paintings this time? I'm able to see that they are nonetheless very an awful lot in love, it's undeniable as day, however do they understand that? I shrugged, sighing at my son's streak of stubbornness. I do not know, I stated clearly, scrunching my eyebrows together. But Edward stated that he and Bella have been going to attempt and begin over sparkling and he would not need a massive deal to be made over the entire scenario, in order that they won't absolutely be telling all people else. The corners of my lips snarled into a smile. Let's examine how long he can preserve it from Alice and let's have a look at how long it takes her to explode after she discovers that Edward and Bella kept it from her. I giggled, and Carlyle laughed softly earlier than kissing my brow. You're certainly one of a type, Esme Cullen. Edward is ignoring my calls, mother. Alice pouted, sitting at our kitchen counter. Oh, terrible infant, I stated ironically, the use of my wrist to wipe my hair out of my eyes. My arms were protected in flour and pie crust, and Alice become imagined to be helping me make pie for the circle of relatives dinner we would be having tomorrow night. The dinner that Edward could now not be attending, because he reputedly had large plans with Bella. Alice rolled her eyes, nonetheless messing with her cellular smartphone. What is up with him? She asked curiously, and I simply pursed my lips without responding. Mom, what do you already know? Alice requested suspiciously, leaning in carefully to narrowing her eyes. Come on, I see it on your eyes, mother, you already know something about what's taking place with Edward. Is he okay? Did he and Rosalie split? Did he finally pull his head out of his ass and recognize he still loves Bella? I shook my head, rolling my eyes at my daughter. I don't know, Alice. You are being ridiculous. Simply stay from your brother's business, you hear me? Alice sighed, and subsequently reached over and commenced assisting me roll pie crust. So, how are things going with Jasper? I requested interestingly, understanding that Alice could jump at the opportunity to speak about her boyfriend, Jasper Whitlock. Certain sufficient, Alice's expression have become dreamy and she smiled. Jasper is high quality, Mom. He is the best man I've ever acknowledged. She gushed. And he will be at dinner the next day night time, too. You may love him, I swear he is a good deal higher than any of the opposite men that I've dated. And oh, he is a professor at Georgetown. Isn't always that simply great? She requested, and endured with her rambling. I smiled to myself, listening to my daughter yammer on and on approximately the boy she become courting. I had heard a bit approximately him before, and met him in brief, but tomorrow changed into our greater reliable assembly. But Alice made true picks, specially in guys. She become the pickiest lady within the history of the sector, that I used to be almost advantageous of. My kids had a variety of differences. Edward turned into more subdued, and he continually were, at the same time as a touch boy. He changed into serious, but had a given that of humor, and became dedicated to the things that he cared about, and labored diligently to do what he had to. Alice, alternatively, became all around the vicinity together with her feelings and persona. She become usually hyper and charismatic, but she turned into additionally a piece moody and could be selfish. And Alice knew exactly what she desired, and glued with it. Edward appeared to be greater uncertain, and that frequently brought about him to become hurting himself and others, similar to the state of affairs remaining year with Bella. I had thought of Bella as a daughter for a long time. From the day Edward brought her to satisfy the circle of relatives, I was instantly taken along with her. I have been satisfied that she and my son had been the maximum perfect couple, and that nothing would ever destroy them up. Glaringly, I have been wrong. However, it appeared that my motherly intuition changed into sooner or later right. Isabella Marie Swan. I watched from my doorway as Edward left, gripping my fingers on the doorknob. Once I finally snapped out of my Edward-induced trance, I managed to get the door close and walk back into my apartment. Sitting down on the couch, I ran one of my hands through my long hair. I was so happy to be back with Edward, but I knew that I couldn't just let myself forgive and forget right away. It had hurt badly when he had moved on so suddenly, even though he had eventually come back to me. And I hated the fact that I could have prevented this entire year of Edward and I being apart. I could have prevented the entire year of suffering and separation and pain. That was gone now, and the opportunity along with it. Now all that was facing me was the future. In the slew of what had happened tonight, Edward had told me that he was willing to settle down and have children. At first, I had been positively thrilled. But now that Edward was gone and I was alone with my thoughts, I had to wonder if that's what Edward really wanted, or if he was just trying to prove that he wanted to be with me. I did want to, eventually, have children with him, and I hoped he felt the same way. That being said, I wanted him to want that, and I didn't want him to give in to having children just to win me over, which wouldn't be fair to either of us. The whole situation was just messy. For now, anyway, hopefully Edward and I would have the opportunity to work things out once and for all, because I knew that I wanted to be with him. I was absolutely certain, there were no second thoughts even crossing my mind. I just didn't know how we were going to get over all of these obstacles that were set out in front of us. Edward saw that he wanted to go away for a trip, and that he wanted me to come with him. At first, the very idea of going away together so early into our new relationship seemed idiotic and ridiculous. Until I really thought about it, of course. All of our friends and his family knew about our past relationship and breakup. And to really work on things, we would need to have some alone time. Going away together, being alone, could actually help move forward together. We would be together without the pressure of other people, but we would also have the opportunity to have a little space if either of us needed it. This was why Edward was the major decision maker and planner of our relationship. He foresaw things before they were even on the horizon of my mind. Really? Are you sure? Because I don't want you to feel pressured into it. I'm sure, Edward, I promised. placing my hand on his chest and smiling up at him. "It'll be a great thing for us." Edward nodded, a smile on his face. "I'm glad you think so. We can go all over," I murmured, playing with the button on his shirt. "We can see all kinds of things and do so many things, and we can do that together." I leaned my head against Edward's warm chest, and it struck me how much I had missed the little things with Edward, like holding hands or kissing or hugging or simply standing with my head against his chest. It was all a wonderful reminder of how much I wanted to make our relationship work. And the way he gently rested his hand on the small of my back and held me close told me that he was feeling the exact same way. "It'll be perfect," Edward promised, kissing the top of my head. "Where do you want to go first?" I thought for a moment, pursing my lips. "West. Let's start to the west, and then work our way back home." "Sounds good. We could start in Southern California and we could work our way up to Washington, if you'd like to stop and see your parents," Edward suggested. I just nodded, not wanting to get into that right now. "And we could just work our way across the country from there." "It'll work out great. I know. We'll be together," I said with a smile, squeezing Edward tightly around the waist. "I have to take off work," I added, and Edward nodded silently, running one of his hands through my long hair. It was the day after our reconciliation, and we were sitting on the couch in my apartment. The lights were on and the television was off, so it was a silent and neutral environment. Edward was supposed to be having dinner with his family tonight, but he had called his mom to cancel, telling her that we had plans together, and reminding her not to mention anything to Alice. Oh, Alice. I really did not know what to do when it came to my best friend. She had really helped me figure out what I wanted, but Edward and I would prefer to keep our relationship quiet for now. But she really was my best friend, and she would be insanely hurt if she knew Edward and I were keeping our relationship from her. "We have to tell Alice," I whispered, and Edward stopping combing my hair with his fingers. "She's my best friend, Edward. And she's your sister. We'll tell Alice," Edward agreed, and that was it. Rosalie Lillian Hale. The next day at work was easier than I had expected. Edward wasn't there. Bella wasn't there. People knew what had happened already, but that was the way I had planned it. I didn't want secrecy around my breakup. Honestly, I should have never gotten involved with Edward in the first place. I knew that he had recently gotten out of a serious relationship when we first started dating, but I hadn't really cared. He was handsome and sweet and funny and rich, and he had made me happy. That is, until I realized he was still very much in love with his ex-fiancée. So that was over, and I had to move on with my life. I'm not going to lie, being broken up with had hurt. But on some level, I understood where Edward was coming from. I, too, had rushed into the relationship and hadn't looked before I leapt. It had all happened so fast, and I had loved every minute of it until it came crashing down just as quickly. "Miss Hale." I looked up from the papers I was examining and came face to face with one of the most handsome men I had ever seen, standing right in the doorway of my office. Don't get me wrong, Edward had been extremely good looking. But this man, he was making me blush. I chastised myself, knowing that I had just gotten out of a relationship, and engagement nonetheless, and I really shouldn't be ogling men I don't even know. "Miss." I blushed when I realized that I hadn't spoken yet. "I'm sorry. Yes, I'm Rosalie Hale. Can I help you?" What the hell was I doing, blushing because of this guy? I don't blush, at least not often. "Yeah, hi." The man stepped into my office completely and pushing the door half shut behind him. "I'm Emmett McCarty. My father is one of the partners here. I'm kind of his errand boy right now. He sent me down to give you this since Bella isn't here." "Thanks," I said, my ears perking up at the sound of Bella's name. "Do you know Bella?" I asked slyly, taking the piece of paper from Emmett. Kind of," Emmett said, his eyes bright. "Do you? Oh, I mean obviously you know her, she works with you." "She's also dating my ex-fiancé," I said, and Emmett's mouth dropped open. "Oh, you're Edward's other ex, damn, I didn't put two and two together, sorry about that," Emmett said, a light blush appearing on his cheeks. "It's fine," I laughed softly, putting the paper down on my desk. "Thanks for the flyer," I said, nodding to it. "But I have to get back to work." Emmett nodded, rubbing the back of his head. "Yeah, okay, it was nice meeting you. Have a nice day." "You too," I called, just before Emmett left my office and closed the door behind him. I smiled slightly, relishing the fact that I could still feel some chemistry for someone. Until recently, I had thought Edward was my soulmate and that we would spend forever in each other's arms. But when he broke up with me, there was a small sense of relief. Because I could have ended up married to Edward. He was a wonderful person, but I couldn't picture it. I had tried, but it all seemed wrong and unnatural. Edward wasn't right for me, although I had viciously and defensively clung on to him, trying to make it work. Because on paper, we would have been the perfect couple. We were both attractive and successful and from good families. And at first, I thought that was all that mattered. But as our short relationship progressed, I realized that apart from the basics, there wasn't much we had in common. There wasn't much for us to bond over, or to enjoy together. The way he looked at Bella made me jealous, and not only because he was supposed to be mine. It was because I wished I could look at Edward with so much love, and I wished he could have looked at me like that. But he never would, because the two of us had simply not been right for each other. I blushed yet again, thinking back to the man that had just left my office, with his wide smile and dimples. Now there was someone I could envision being with, and I had only just met him. The end.